The piercing words of Julian Hunter echoed through the towering glass walls of Hunter Innovations' high-rise office. "Get her out!" In that instant, time stood still. Sophia, his wife of 15 years, stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with disbelief before she turned and walked away. The coldness of the moment was like a slap to Julian's face. He didn't even blink. It wasn't the first time things had gone wrong between them. But as he watched her disappear from his view, Julian knew deep down that this time it was different. This time, she was truly leaving. Julian Hunter, the 45-year-old CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, had it all: wealth, power, respect, success. But at home, his family, his wife Sophia, and twin daughters Liv and Grace, had become shadows of the life he once cherished. The love he thought was secure was slowly fading, swallowed by the pressures of his empire. Despite his world of luxury, Julian had built his empire at the expense of his family. His marriage to Sophia, once filled with laughter and love, had crumbled under the weight of his obsession with success. But the true cost was hidden in plain sight. His constant neglect had turned his home into a cold, empty space. Now, his actions, his words, would drive his family away forever. Before we continue, I ask just one thing from you. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the city you are watching from. Your support means more than you can imagine. The love you give is the fuel that drives this story forward. Thank you for being part of this journey, my family. Now, let's continue the story. Julian had always believed that power, wealth, and success were enough. But as he stood in the empty mansion that once held everything dear to him, he realized that nothing could prepare him for the truth of what he'd lost. And what Sophia left behind was more than just an empty house. It was the stark truth he had avoided for far too long. The next week, Julian found himself in a state of complete desolation. The silence in the mansion was deafening. No laughter, no joy, just the harsh reminder of his mistakes. Sophia, the woman he'd once promised the world to, was gone, taking their daughters with her. The weight of his actions, of a lifetime spent chasing an elusive dream, finally caught up with him. Julian sat alone, surrounded by the emptiness he had created, knowing that his life would never be the same again. He picked up the letter Sophia had left behind, and with trembling hands opened it. What she wrote would change his life forever. Julian's day had been long, exhausting, a typical Tuesday in his world, a constant stream of meetings, phone calls, and endless demands that drained him without ever filling the void. By the time he returned home, the weight of the day bore down on him. He dragged his feet through the grand hallway, his mind buzzing with the noise of the office. He hardly noticed the familiar surroundings, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the smell of fresh flowers that Sophia had always loved, the carefully arranged furniture that once felt like home. It was all part of the illusion he had created, the one that told him he had everything he needed. But now it all felt hollow, empty. The house, his house, was silent. There was no sound of the girls' laughter echoing from the playroom, no chatter from Sophia in the kitchen, no soft, calming music drifting from the living room where she used to unwind after a long day. Julian paused at the foot of the staircase, his heart heavy in his chest. He stood still, waiting for a sound, a sign, something to break the silence. Nothing. With a sinking feeling, he made his way up the stairs. The familiar creaks beneath his weight seemed amplified in the stillness. He pushed open the door to the master bedroom and stopped, dead in his tracks. The room was bare. The bed, once the centerpiece of their shared space, was neatly made as if untouched for days. His eyes darted around, scanning for any sign of life. But there was nothing. No clothes strewn across the floor, no shoes left in a hurry by the bedside. The walk-in closet, usually overflowing with Sophia's clothing, was now eerily empty. Sophia's side of the bed was pristine, the pillow perfectly fluffed, her nightstand devoid of her favorite books, her glasses, or the half-finished cup of tea she always left behind. His heart raced as he moved through the house, his mind unwilling to process the reality in front of him. He reached the girls' room next. The door was ajar, but the silence there was even more suffocating. The room that used to be filled with the sound of their playful squeals and the sight of their colorful toys scattered across the floor was now a ghost of its former self. The bunk beds were neatly made, the shelves empty except for a few stray dolls and books. Their drawings, once proudly displayed on the walls, were gone, leaving behind nothing but faded tape marks. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He reached for their favorite stuffed animals, the ones they had slept with every night. They were gone too. He felt as though the walls were closing in on him. His own home felt like a foreign place, as if it were mocking him for all the times he had ignored the signs, all the moments he had dismissed. His phone buzzed in his pocket, the sudden vibration jolting him from his thoughts. He pulled it out, desperate for some connection, some sign that he wasn't truly alone. Sophia's name flashed on the screen. His heart skipped a beat. He answered it without hesitation, his voice shaking. "Sophia, where are you? What's going on?" The line went dead. The silence that followed was more deafening than anything he had ever experienced. He stared at the phone, willing it to ring again. But it remained still, the screen now blank. Frantic, Julian dashed to his office. His fingers flew over the keys as he checked his emails, his messages, his call logs. Nothing. No new messages. No signs of where she could have gone. Then he saw it. On his desk, among the clutter of papers, sat an envelope, neatly placed in the center. His name was written in elegant handwriting across the front, Sophia's handwriting. Julian's heart hammered in his chest as he tore it open. He unfolded the letter, reading the words she had left behind, the words that would define his future. "Julian, I don't even know where to begin, because I know you've never truly heard me. I've spent years trying to make you see me, trying to make you see us. But your empire always came first, didn't it? I asked you for attention, for help, for love, but you couldn't even see me anymore, not really. We were just part of the background, the ones who kept the house running while you focused on numbers, on meetings, on everything except what mattered most. I'm not leaving because I hate you, Julian. I'm leaving because I can't keep losing myself in the process. I've forgotten who I am, and I need to find myself again. I'm taking the girls and starting over. They deserve a life where they are seen, where they are loved. I hope one day you'll understand, and maybe then you'll see the man I used to love and the man I hope you can become again. Sophia." The words burned in his chest as he read them. Each line, each sentence felt like a blow, the weight of his neglect sinking in with every word. The empire he had built, his greatest accomplishment, had cost him everything. He had built something strong, something successful. But in doing so, he had torn apart the very thing that gave his life meaning, his family. He let the letter fall from his hands, staring at the empty room around him. His life, once so certain, had come crashing down. The realization settled over him like a heavy fog. He had lost everything, And now, Sophia and the girls were gone, taking with them the only thing that had ever truly mattered. As the words from the letter echoed in his mind, Julian knew that he had no choice but to change. But the question remained, could he? Could he ever make up for the years of neglect, the countless missed opportunities to be present in their lives? The answer, Julian feared, was locked away with Sophia, somewhere he could no longer reach. Julian's days blurred into one another. Every morning he sat in the sterile silence of his office, a mountain of messages, calls, and appointments waiting for his attention. Yet no matter how many times he checked his phone, there was nothing. No word from Sophia, no trace of where she or the girls might be. The emptiness of the mansion echoed through his thoughts, but it was the quiet of his professional life that consumed him now. His business empire, once the thing that defined him, felt like a distant memory. The calls to his private investigator went unanswered. He hired another one, then another. The leads were always dead ends. The calls to friends, to her family, to anyone who might know something, no one had anything. The weight of his failure pressed on him. Each day he spent hours in front of his laptop, poring over emails and making calls, pretending to care about the bottom line when every part of him was consumed with finding them. His fingers trembled as he typed, his thoughts a whirlwind of guilt, regret, and desperation. But nothing moved forward. Every phone call felt like a futile effort. The more he pushed to find Sophia, the more it felt like she slipped further away. Even his business was slipping through his fingers. The board of directors had been patient for a while, but they were growing restless. Emails came in, each one marked urgent, as if the company's future depended on the next deal, the next growth milestone. Julian couldn't focus. The numbers on the page, the figures on the spreadsheet, all blurred together. He couldn't think past the ache in his chest. He knew the company needed him, but how could he be expected to give his all when the life he had built was crumbling around him? "Julian, you're not listening," Sarah Jensen, his CFO, said for the third time during their meeting. "We need you to focus. The market is changing, and we need to pivot. The board is concerned. You have to steer the ship." "I'm trying," Julian snapped, his voice cracking in frustration. His hands gripped the edge of the desk as he struggled to steady his breath. He didn't care about market trends, growth projections, or anything else. All he cared about was where Sophia and the girls were. I don't know where they are. I can't think about anything else." The room fell silent. Sarah exchanged a quick glance with the others at the table. Julian saw it, sympathy mixed with skepticism. It only made the guilt heavier. They had seen him like this before, but never to this extent. His mind was unraveling, and no amount of financial success could patch the damage. After the meeting, Julian returned to his office, burying himself in yet another round of phone calls. Each one seemed further removed from reality, each conversation more distant. He wasn't present. His team could see it. The pressure from his board was relentless. The company's focus was growth, not grief, and Julian's personal life was quickly becoming irrelevant to everyone except him. The search for Sophia and the girls led him to another dead end. He had called Marlene, Sophia's sister, only to be greeted with a harsh truth he wasn't ready to hear. "Marlene, I don't know where they are. I've tried everything." Julian's voice trembled. He had hoped for some kind of answer, some reassurance that they were just waiting, that he would find them and everything would go back to the way it was. Marlene's voice on the other end of the line was flat, devoid of the warmth he had expected. "I know you're desperate, Julian, but you need to understand something. Sophia left because she needed space. She needed to heal." Julian's stomach twisted. "What does that mean? Where are they?" "They're not lost. "They're just not with you anymore," Marlene said, each word carefully chosen. "She asked me not to tell you where they are, and I won't. But you need to face the truth. You've neglected her, your daughters, for so long. You prioritized your work over them. And now, she's done. They're done." Julian swallowed hard, his mind reeling. He had always known that his work consumed him, but hearing it out loud from someone so close to Sophia brought the brutal reality crashing in. I didn't know," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt them. I didn't know how far I'd gone." Marlene sighed. "It's too late for apologies, Julian. Maybe it's time to accept that you can't fix everything. You've built your empire, but it's at the expense of the people who loved you. Maybe now it's time to start thinking about what matters." The line went dead and Julian sat there staring at his phone. Marlene's words hung in the air, louder than any phone call, louder than any meeting with the board. He could feel his life slipping away, one painful realization at a time. The search was no longer just about finding Sophia and the girls. It was about facing the truth he had tried to outrun for years. He had lost everything that truly mattered, and now he had to figure out how to face the consequences. Days turned into weeks. Julian's search for Sophia and the girls grew more desperate, more frantic with each passing day. The silence in the mansion had become suffocating, and the house that had once been his sanctuary now felt like a prison. He spent his nights in the same bed they had shared, surrounded by memories he had long ignored, consumed by guilt that weighed on him like 100 tons. Despite his constant phone calls, the endless emails, and the private investigators' efforts, Julian had nothing to show for his search. He had run out of places to look. His every move felt futile. His empire, once the object of his unwavering focus, now seemed like a hollow shell of success, an empty trophy. He had everything but the one thing that mattered, his family. Then, out of nowhere, a lifeline came. It was late one afternoon when his phone rang. Sarah Jensen, his old business associate, was on the other end. She had been one of the few people who had stayed in touch after Sophia's departure. Julian had assumed she had her own life to deal with, but today she had news. "Julian," Sarah said, her voice more subdued than usual. "I've been hearing things, and I think I have a lead for you." Julian sat up straight. "What kind of lead?" "I know you've been asking around, but I heard about a woman who sounds an awful lot like Sophia. She's been volunteering at women's shelters, helping victims of abuse and neglect. It's not much, but it's a start." His heart raced as he grabbed a pen and paper. "What's her name? Where can I find her?" "I don't know much more," Sarah continued. "But the place she's been working at is called The Haven. It's a shelter for women escaping all kinds of situations. They don't give out information about their volunteers, but it's worth looking into." Julian's mind spun. The words hit him like a thunderclap. He had spent weeks trying to find Sophia, only to learn she had been right there, helping others, helping women in situations he had failed to see, or worse, ignored. He had built an empire of success, while she had been building something entirely different, something purposeful, something meaningful. He didn't waste another second. He thanked Sarah, grabbed his coat, and left the mansion in a rush, the weight of the situation heavy on his shoulders. The drive to the Haven was slow, his thoughts consumed by the implications of what he was about to discover. The road stretched out before him, long and endless, much like the distance between the man he had been and the man he needed to become. The closer he got to the shelter, the more his anticipation grew. Was this where she had gone? Had she truly left to build a life, one where she was no longer defined by her role as his wife? When he arrived at the Haven, the building was modest, a quiet, unassuming structure tucked away on a side street. It looked nothing like the sleek corporate buildings he was used to, but it was full of warmth. A welcome sign greeted him at the entrance, a stark contrast to the coldness he had felt in his own home for so long. He took a deep breath and walked inside. A woman at the reception desk looked up as he entered. She smiled politely, but Julian could see the skepticism in her eyes. He tried to steady his nerves. "I'm looking for a volunteer," Julian said, his voice hesitant. "Sophia Hunter. Does she work here?" The receptionist paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't release any personal information about our volunteers." Julian's heart sank, but he pressed on. "I just need to know if she's here. I have to find her." The receptionist looked at him carefully, her expression softening. "I can't tell you where she is, but I can tell you this. She's been a huge help to the women here. She's been with us for months now. She doesn't ask for anything in return, just gives and gives." That hit Julian harder than he expected. Here was Sophia, not just surviving, but thriving. She had built a new life, one that didn't involve him. She had found her purpose, a mission that gave her life meaning. Julian could feel the sting of his own inadequacy as he realized just how far she had come without him. "Can you tell me anything more?" Julian asked, desperation creeping into his voice. The receptionist's face softened. "I can tell you that Sophia has been helping women who were where she once was, lost, trapped in their own lives. She's been teaching them to rebuild." "She's strong, Julian. Stronger than I think even she realized. She's not just here to volunteer. She's here to make a real difference." It was then that Julian understood. Sophia hadn't just left him. She had found something far more powerful than anything he could offer her. She had found herself. His heart sank as the weight of the truth settled in. Sophia had been suffocating in his shadow for years, but she had found a way to break free. The woman who had stood by him for so long, who had sacrificed everything for their family, had finally stepped into the light of her own life. She was no longer the person he had taken for granted. And now, he had to face the reality of his failure. Sophia hadn't just run away, she had rebuilt herself. And in doing so, she had discovered a new purpose. Julian stood there for a moment, letting the gravity of it all sink in. Sophia was no longer a part of his life, not because she wanted to escape him, but because she had created something worth fighting for, something that didn't revolve around him. The door had closed, and Julian had no idea how to open it again. But now he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just stand there and wish for things to change. He had to change. The woman he once knew had found her calling, and now it was time for Julian to find his. The next few days passed in a haze of confusion and regret. Julian's mind raced in circles, trying to make sense of the pieces of his life he had scattered and neglected. The discovery of Sophia's new life had shaken him to his core, but the real weight of his actions only began to settle in now. The more he thought about her journey, how she had found purpose, strength, and independence, the more he realized how far removed he had been from the family he claimed to love. It was late one evening when Julian stood in the foyer of the mansion, staring at the staircase where he used to watch Sophia and the girls rush down to greet him after a long day at the office. He could almost hear their laughter echoing in his mind, a sound that seemed so distant now. The house that once felt like a haven was now a tomb, a hollow space filled with the ghosts of happier times. He made his way slowly to the study, the one room where he had spent countless hours buried in work. The polished oak desk, the awards, the stacks of papers, everything was still in place, but it felt wrong. The walls, which had once been adorned with photos of family vacations, birthdays, and anniversaries, now stood silent. The frames were gone. The memories were gone. Julian opened one of the drawers, searching for something, anything that might help him make sense of the wreckage. His fingers brushed against a stack of old family photo albums. He hesitated for a moment before pulling them out. He opened the first album, and there they were, pictures of Sophia smiling, of the girls' first steps, their first day of school, their birthdays. Julian traced his fingers over their faces, the faces of people who had once been the center of his world. The images felt like a punch to his gut. He had been there, yes, but he hadn't really been there. These moments were filled with laughter, but they were also filled with absence. His absence. He had been so caught up in his empire, so obsessed with building something monumental, that he had missed the small, fleeting moments that truly mattered. Flipping through the pages, Julian's chest tightened as he recalled each instance. There was a picture of the family on vacation in the Bahamas, Sophia laughing under the sun, the girls playing in the sand. He could feel the warmth of that day, but it wasn't real anymore. He remembered the times he'd stayed behind in the office while they went off to enjoy the world. His excuses felt hollow now. "I'm doing this for us," he had told himself over and over. But there had been no us left. Not anymore. He slammed the album shut and reached for the next one. Desperate to find something that would help him reconnect with the man he used to be, the one who still cared, the one who had once been present. But as he opened the second album, the weight of his regrets grew heavier. The pages seemed to mock him. There was a picture of their anniversary dinner, a quiet, intimate affair where they were both dressed up, smiling at the camera. He remembered that night. Sophia had been so full of life, so hopeful. She had looked at him with such love, such trust. He had barely looked up from his phone. It was all so clear now. The dinners he missed, the vacations he skipped, the birthdays he'd been too busy to attend, all the times he had chosen his work over his family, thinking that it would be enough. But it never was. The mansion, the cars, the fortune, none of it mattered without the people he had loved, the people he had failed. Julian sank into the leather chair in the corner of the study, his hands trembling. His empire, the one he had fought so hard to build, now felt like nothing more than a house of cards. The wealth, the success, the admiration of his colleagues, it was all meaningless without his family. His world had been so focused on external achievement that he had completely lost sight of what truly mattered. He closed his eyes and leaned back, the tears coming unbidden. He had built an empire, yes, but at what cost? His wife had left. His daughters had left. And now, he was left with nothing but the cold emptiness of his own creation. The pain of realization was overwhelming. Sophia hadn't just walked away from him. She had walked away from the life he had provided, a life that had slowly suffocated her. He had been so blind, so arrogant, thinking that his work was a sacrifice worth making, thinking that his success would make up for his absence. But all it had done was tear them apart. As Julian sat there in the darkness, the weight of his mistakes became unbearable. He had lost everything. The company, the wealth, the success, they were all hollow. The one thing he had taken for granted, his family, was gone. And it was his own fault. In that moment, Julian knew that there was no turning back. His life would never be the same. But the question lingered in his mind. Was it too late to find redemption? Would Sophia and the girls ever come back? Or had he lost them forever? He stood up, his legs unsteady. The photo albums sat on the desk mocking him, but they also gave him something else, a reminder. A reminder of what he had lost and what he could still fight for. If he could change. If he could prove through actions, not words, that he was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild what he had broken. But the first step, Julian knew, was confronting the man he had become, and that would be the hardest part of all. Months had passed since Julian's life had unraveled, and in that time he had done everything in his power to locate Sophia. He'd hired private investigators, combed through old contacts, and followed every lead. But it wasn't until he received a tip from Sarah Jensen, an old business associate, that he caught his first real break. Sarah told him about a woman who had been volunteering at shelters for women in need. She didn't give him much, only a name and a vague description, but it was enough for Julian to act. His heart hammered in his chest as he entered the local art gallery, the destination he had been given after days of investigation. The gallery was tucked away in a small street, hidden behind larger, more bustling establishments. A quiet haven, just as he had imagined Sophia would seek. He stepped inside, the door chiming softly as he entered. The gallery was serene, dimly lit to highlight the pieces displayed on the walls. Julian's eyes immediately searched for her, for the woman who had left him, but who had also rebuilt her life in a way he couldn't comprehend. He moved deeper into the gallery, stopping in front of a set of paintings that seemed to scream at him with emotion. The first painting caught his breath, a portrait of a woman standing alone on a beach, her arms outstretched to the horizon. The ocean behind her was turbulent, but the woman's face, though weary, was full of hope. Julian recognized the style immediately. It was hers. This wasn't just a painting, it was a piece of her heart, a reflection of the freedom she had found. He moved to the next painting, a series of abstract shapes, jagged and rough, swirling around in chaos. But at the center, there was a soft, glowing light, almost hidden beneath the tumult. It was beautiful, heart-wrenching, and it made Julian's chest tighten. Each stroke seemed to tell a story of pain, of suffering, but also of healing, a journey he had never seen her take, at least not in front of him. The last painting was a stark contrast, a simple image of a woman holding two children, their faces blurred, lost in shadow. It was tender, protective, but it was also a moment of quiet defiance. This was Sophia, the mother, the protector, the woman who had faced so much, yet still stood strong, still kept going. Julian couldn't take his eyes off of it. He felt like he was looking at the woman he had failed, the one who had loved him despite all his shortcomings. He was so caught up in the paintings that he didn't hear her approach until she was standing just behind him. "Sophia," Julian breathed, his voice thick with emotion. He turned slowly, finally facing the woman who had both haunted and haunted him for months. She looked as stunning as ever, though different. Her eyes, once soft and trusting, were now guarded. The years of neglect, of him shutting her out, had left their mark. But there was also something else there now, a strength, an independence that made Julian feel small. She didn't say a word at first. Her gaze moved over him, her eyes scanning his face as if measuring him, seeing him for who he was now. Not the man he had been, but the man he was trying to become. "Julian," she said finally, her voice calm but distant, "you found me." His heart twisted at the coldness in her tone. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hatred, it was detachment. She wasn't the woman he had once known, the woman who had smiled when he entered the room, who had waited up for him at night. No. This was a woman who had lived without him, who had learned to breathe without the weight of his neglect pulling her down. "I've been looking for you," Julian said, his voice raw with emotion. He stepped forward, but Sophia held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "You don't get to come back in like this," she said quietly. "You don't get to walk in here and expect everything to be the same because you finally decided to find me. You don't get to take me back, Julian. Not like this." Her words cut through him, deeper than any physical blow ever could. He opened his mouth to speak, to explain, to apologize, but no words came. He was out of practice, out of time. His mind raced, but his tongue felt tied. All he could do was stand there, watching as she took a step back, maintaining that space between them. "You've missed everything," she continued, her voice steady, but her eyes filled with a quiet sorrow. "All the moments that mattered. The moments you were never there for. I spent years trying to make you see me, to make you see us. But you were always too busy building your empire, too busy chasing the dream that would never fulfill you." Julian swallowed, his throat tight. He felt the weight of her words, of her pain. The realization that she had been right all along hit him like a flood. "I'm sorry," he whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I failed you, Sophia. I failed you in every way." Sophia didn't respond. She didn't even look at him directly. Her eyes were on the paintings behind him, as if they held more answers than he ever could. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Julian," she said, her voice softer now, but firm. "I'm not asking you to fix it. It's not about fixing things. It's about showing up. Proving that you've changed. And that's something I can't give you. Not now." Julian nodded, the sting of her words settling in his chest. It was the first time in years that he truly understood the weight of his failures. And as much as he wanted to make it right, he knew it wouldn't be easy. It would take more than just words. It would take action. Sophia gave him one last look, one that was too calm, too distant, before turning away. "This is where I belong now," she said quietly. "I have a purpose, and I'm not going back to a life that only took from me." Julian stood in the gallery, watching her walk away, his heart heavy with regret. This wasn't the reunion he had imagined. It wasn't the closure he had hoped for. But it was a start. A painful start, but the only start he could hope for. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He had to change. And it wouldn't happen overnight. Julian stood in front of his office window, looking out at the sprawling cityscape. It was the same view he had looked at for years, yet today it felt different, empty, almost suffocating. He had spent his life climbing higher and higher, chasing success, wealth, and power, but now, standing here, those things seemed meaningless. He had built an empire, but it had come at the cost of everything that truly mattered, his family. He took a deep breath and picked up the phone. He was about to make a call that would change his life. "I need to step down," he said firmly into the receiver, his voice resolute. The decision had been a long time coming, but now it felt like the only thing he could do to begin fixing what he had broken. Julian Hunter, the powerful CEO of Hunter Innovations, was officially stepping down. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. Julian had spent his life being consumed by his company, prioritizing profits, stock prices, and business growth over the people who had loved him. But no more. He had to start over, starting with himself. He needed to unlearn the habits that had made him the man he was. The first step was therapy. Julian had always dismissed the idea, thinking it was unnecessary. But now, sitting in the empty mansion, surrounded by the silence of his failures, he realized how much he had neglected his own mental health. He had ignored his emotional state, buried his feelings under the guise of work, thinking it would all be okay as long as the business was thriving. But it wasn't okay. Not anymore. He started attending weekly therapy sessions, each one forcing him to confront his demons. At first it felt strange, talking to a stranger about his emotions, about the things he had buried for years. But slowly Julian began to peel back the layers. He began to understand his own behaviors, the deep-rooted insecurities and fears that had driven him to overwork himself, to neglect his family, to be absent from the lives that truly needed him. But even as he worked on himself, Julian knew it wouldn't be enough. Fixing himself was only part of the journey. The real challenge was trying to fix what he had done to his family, to Sophia and the girls. They had been gone for months now, and despite his efforts to reach out, he had heard nothing. Determined to rebuild the relationships he had destroyed, Julian took the next step, reaching out to his daughters. He had always been a father from a distance, too caught up in his own world to be there for them when they needed him most. Now he was determined to make up for it. He started small. Handwritten letters, sent to each of them, expressing his love and regret. He included drawings and notes about things they used to enjoy, things he remembered them talking about when they were younger. Julian even sent them small gifts, a charm bracelet for Liv, a drawing set for Grace, trying to show them that he was thinking of them, even though he was no longer a part of their daily lives. The first letter he sent to Liv came back unopened. The second one was returned with a note, written in her delicate handwriting, "Don't bother. You're not welcome." Julian read the note over and over, the sting of her words cutting deep. Grace's response wasn't much better. She sent a short message, "Thanks, but no thanks." His heart ached. They had grown so distant from him, and no matter how hard he tried, the bond that had once been so strong felt irreparably broken. Still, Julian didn't give up. He kept sending letters, kept trying, even though every attempt felt like a rejection. He also took the girls on outings, simple things, like going to the park or to a movie they used to love. The outings were filled with awkward silences and forced smiles. The laughter that once filled their time together was replaced by uncomfortable quiet, as if they were strangers. The girls had built their own world without him, a world where he no longer fit in. Despite his efforts, Sophia remained distant. She didn't respond to his calls. He knew she was still angry, still hurt, but Julian couldn't afford to give up. He had to try, even if it seemed hopeless. One day, after weeks of relentless effort, Julian received a text from Marlene. It was brief. "She's not ready to talk to you, not yet. Give her space, Julian, and take care of yourself. You're not helping anyone if you keep breaking down." The words hit Julian like a punch to the gut. He wasn't helping anyone. His need for redemption was only making things worse. But Marlene's message was clear. If he wanted any chance at reconciliation, he had to give them time. He had to give Sophia time. As the days turned into weeks, Julian's efforts seemed to slow. His therapy sessions grew harder, the reality of the situation pressing down on him. But despite all the setbacks, despite the frustration, Julian knew one thing for sure. He would not give up. The road to redemption was long. It was uncertain. But Julian was finally beginning to understand that rebuilding his life and rebuilding his family would require more than just sending letters. It would require consistent effort, patience, and time. And he was ready to put in the work, no matter how long it took. There were no guarantees, but Julian was determined to try. The path to redemption wasn't linear. Julian had learned that the hard way. Days turned into weeks, and still, every effort to reach his daughters seemed like an uphill battle. But slowly, something was changing. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden breakthrough or grand gesture, but the quiet signs were there. He noticed how Sophia no longer shut the door when he came over to visit, how she would linger a little longer during their brief exchanges, no longer rushing him out of the house. He kept his promises. There was no more rushing through life with his work as the focal point. He was present in a way he had never been before. After months of distant phone calls, Julian found himself sitting with Grace, watching her take tentative steps toward him at the kitchen table, her hand in his, asking him about his day. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of her hand on his and realized how much he had taken it for granted. The first time Julian took Liv to the park, they didn't speak much. He pushed her on the swing, his gaze never leaving her small frame as she soared higher into the air. There were no words of apology, no pleading, just a silent promise he couldn't yet express. A promise to be here, in this moment, with her. Sophia watched it all unfold from a distance. Her skepticism had never fully dissipated, but she had started to see subtle changes in Julian. She couldn't ignore the small shifts, the way he listened more, the way he showed up on time, the way he made himself available when Grace needed help with her homework. It was slow progress, but it was progress nonetheless. Julian didn't rush them. He learned quickly that the road to rebuilding trust wasn't about grand gestures or declarations. It was about being there when it counted, and more importantly, it was about learning to appreciate the small moments. Family dinners were no longer strained, uncomfortable affairs. Julian took the time to cook, to sit at the table and ask the girls about their day, just like he used to years ago, before he became too consumed by the demands of his business. He learned how to be fully present. Even the simplest things became significant. The laughter during board games, the shared glances over the dinner table, the small gestures of affection that once felt so foreign to him. Julian found joy in these moments, realizing they were the foundation of everything he had been missing. These moments, these family moments, were his true wealth. And the school performances? Julian had missed so many of them in the past, buried in work and excuses. But now, when he received the invitation to Liv's school recital, he didn't hesitate. He took the day off, got dressed up, and sat in the front row, cheering for her, his heart swelling with pride. It wasn't easy. He didn't expect it to be. Sophia wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet. And Julian didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, he focused on earning it, showing up every day with the intention of being the father and husband he had once promised to be. Sophia's evaluation of Julian was cautious, but she saw his effort. It wasn't enough for her to fully open up to him again, but it was enough for her to allow him to spend more time with the girls. She watched as Julian made time for them, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different.
He was proving himself with actions, not words. He was building a new relationship with his daughters, not as the absentee father who only showed up for special occasions, but as someone who was finally ready to be there, day in and day out. Sophia's heart softened in small, imperceptible ways, like cracks in the ice beginning to form, hesitant but real. It was a slow process, but Julian was patient now, something he had never been before. The journey was far from over. The scars of the past wouldn't disappear overnight, but Julian was learning that redemption wasn't something that could be achieved in a day. It was the long road, the small steps that counted. And for the first time in years, Julian felt like he was on the right path. The rebuilding had begun, not just of his family, but of himself. And although the road ahead was still uncertain, Julian knew one thing for sure. He was no longer walking it alone. The phone call came on a Thursday morning as Julian sat on the couch in the living room, sipping his coffee, watching the girls argue over a board game on the floor. For a moment, the noise and the chaos felt like a comfort, a reminder that life was happening in front of him, no longer slipping away, unnoticed. It was Sarah Jensen, his former business associate. The voice on the other end of the line was laced with excitement, but Julian could hear the underlying tension. "Julian!" Sarah's voice cut through. "They want you back, the board, the investors. They're offering you a chance to return as CEO. They're willing to give you a free hand to rebuild Hunter Innovations, to pick up where you left off." Julian's stomach churned. The offer was tempting, too tempting. It was everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed. He had built Hunter Innovations into a titan in the tech world, and now it was waiting for him to return, to reclaim the throne that had once been his. But as he glanced at the girls, laughter erupting from the living room, the weight of his past mistakes bore down on him. "Let me think about it," Julian said, his voice tight, before ending the call. The room felt smaller now, suffocating. He looked at his phone, the message blinking back at him, a text from one of his most trusted investors waiting for a reply. Julian felt the pull of the old world, the one where his value was measured in numbers and achievements, where his identity had been tied to success. But the image of Sophia's soft gaze, the quiet trust she had begun to show him, made him hesitate. He couldn't go back. Sophia walked into the room, her eyes wary as she sensed the change in his mood. Julian stood up, walking over to the window. He stared out at the garden, the vibrant colors of the flowers he had once dismissed now catching his eye, reminding him of how much he had missed while focusing on everything that didn't matter. "What's wrong?" Sophia asked softly, her voice hesitant. "I got an offer," Julian said, his words laced with a bitter realization. "They want me back at the company. They're offering me everything I ever wanted." Sophia didn't say anything for a long moment. She didn't need to. Her expression said it all, the same quiet disappointment, the same ache of someone who had been left behind too many times. "And what do you want, Julian?" she finally asked, her voice calm but with an edge of something deeper. Julian turned to face her, the weight of his decision sinking in. "I can't go back," he said quietly, but with a firm conviction he hadn't felt in years. "I've been running from what matters for too long. I chose my career over everything else, and now I see what it's cost me. My family, you." Sophia's eyes softened slightly, but she remained silent. There was still a long way to go, a lot of rebuilding, but this moment felt like the beginning of something new. The phone buzzed in his pocket, but Julian ignored it. Instead, he walked over to the kitchen, pulled a piece of paper from the drawer, and started writing, something he hadn't done in years. Sophia watched him, a tentative hope flickering in her eyes as he filled the page with his words. He was making a commitment, not just to them, but to himself, a promise that no empire, no success would ever come between him and his family again. When he was done, Julian walked back to Sophia, holding the paper in his hand. "I'm done," he said. "I'm stepping down from the company. I'm here now, and I'm going to be here for good." Sophia looked at him for a long time. Then slowly she nodded. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, but it was a step, a real step, and that, for now, was enough. The evening came, and with it another school performance, this time Grace's. Julian held Sophia's hand as they walked into the auditorium, the buzz of voices and laughter filling the space. He had missed this so many times before, but tonight he was truly present. As he watched Grace sing her song on stage, Julian's heart swelled with pride. He looked over at Sophia, her face softened by the sight of their daughter so full of life. For the first time in a long time, Julian didn't feel like an outsider in his own life. After the performance, the family walked home together. Liv, Grace, and Julian laughed as they strolled down the street, the familiar rhythm of family life beginning to settle back into place. Sophia walked beside him, her hand still in his, the space between them narrowing with every step. Julian knew the road ahead was still uncertain. There would be struggles, setbacks, and perhaps moments when he would question if he was truly capable of changing. But for the first time, he didn't feel the overwhelming need to fix everything at once. He had time. Time to make up for the years he had lost. As they reached the house, the lights from the porch illuminated their faces, and Julian looked at his family. The empire he had built, the wealth, the power, it all seemed so insignificant now. What mattered was this: being here, with them, every day. He had no idea what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, Julian wasn't afraid of it, because this time he was ready to build something that truly mattered. And that, he realized, was the real redemption.